Journeys is your go-to podcast for all things creativity. I'm your co-host, Dave Petrosky, chair of the Communication, Media, and Screen Studies Department.
And I am your co-host, Melanie Odive, Venezuelan designer and educator. This is the podcast about creativity, what it is in its many forms, and how we can become more creative in our everyday lives.
Okay, welcome back to Creative Journeys. We're here in our just after mid-season. Hi, Melanie. How are you?
Hi, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing well. We have our next guest, which is actually the second guest of our since our break.
Yes.
Do you want to have the honors?
Absolutely. So our wonderful guest today is Dr. Lauren Tucker. She's an associate professor in the Department of Special Education and the area coordinator for the graduate program in Assistive Technology and Emotional and Behavioral Disorders, which is a little bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you here. What was most exciting about when you came in is that you brought stuff.
Yes.
You got props and things. This is so cool.
And we've been talking about this for the past couple of days of like how we can start making our episodes a little bit more interactive now that we're doing video. And I just love that we didn't even have to tell you or ask you. It was so exciting.
Just happened.
Right?
That's
just
awesome.
Channeled.
So, Laura, could you tell us a little bit about what your interests are and what you've been doing, what you've been working on, that kind of stuff?
Sure. So I'd say that my real area of passion is assistive technology. And for anyone who's unfamiliar, those are kind of any tools that help someone improve their ability to do something. And so it's a very broad range of what assistive technology is. We usually hear technology and think iPad, right, or something electronic, but it really can be anything, which is one of the reasons why I brought some props to share how assistive technology can promote creativity and kind of where I see it within the field and supporting individuals.
Nice.
It's fascinating.
We're our office is right next door to the Adaptech lab.
Oh, yes.
I had no idea.
Yeah. It's down that side hallway, and it's kind of tucked in the corner there. But it's it's pretty. They have some pretty cool toys there.
Yes.
Well, so Lauren started full time, I believe, the same year.
Same year, yep.
That I started full time. So I don't remember if it was in the presentation at the beginning of the semester or if it was at TAPAS I first heard about you and what you do. And since then, I've been following on LinkedIn, on Instagram. And I just love everything whenever you're at conferences or the stuff that you do at the Bushnell Theater.
Bushnell, yes.
That's what you pronounce it. And all how you adapt so many toys for kids, for adults, and everything is so impressive. And I was not that familiar with adaptive technology until I met you and I started following your work. So I always find it very interesting to see and follow up with what you're doing in your research.
Thank you. And that's one of the things that I find is sometimes a gap, right, is thinking about how assistive technology can support fun and recreation, right, and doing something as a hobby. Right. And that's one of the reasons why toy adapting is such a big part of our program at Southern. So I did one of my props that I brought with me is this cute little dinosaur. And what he has is he's got a wire coming out of his foot where traditionally he would have like an activation switch. So these toys are adapted for individuals who might have some physical challenges, typically, hitting a switch that might be very small, that might require like your fine motor skills to be very finite. And so with this, it allows us to plug in an adapted switch, which then makes this toy so much more accessible to a wide audience of individuals. And so I'm just going to demonstrate here. So I've got my cute little dinosaur. And I've got this beautiful red button. And when I activate the red button,
Wow.
he dances.
It's a huge red button.
Huge red button. I know, huge red button.
That's awesome. Well, as soon as you came in, I was just like, I have to touch it.
Me
I have
too.
to touch that button. I have to get it.
Well, feel free.
I'm going to touch it.
Yes. It does. It has that nice tactile feedback too from the button. Yep, and he'll keep going, and then you can turn him off, which is really nice.
Cue, turn
How
him
do you
off.
turn him off?
Oh,
Just
touch
press
the button again. Yep, there you go.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the reason we do this in our classes is because there is a market for adapted toys. And unfortunately, a toy of this nature might be something around $75 to $100 for a family, right?
Yeah.
And when we are teaching individuals to use different like motor aspects to activate, a computer or a communication device, we really need multiple opportunities to practice that in lots of different settings. And oftentimes, families and schools find that their budget allows for one toy. And how boring is that to play with one toy over and over? And so what we do...
Because just this dinosaur, we saw it twice, and I'm like, okay, I'm done.
Next. Right. So what we do is we take toys that are not traditionally adapted, and I teach educators in the field how to adapt them on a very DIY budget.
Sure.
So now we're available to donate these toys to families, to schools, and so we kind of distribute them as needed, and the special ed department funds that project.
That's amazing. Yeah. Have you ever taken that outside of the classroom environment into more of a let's have the Southern community workshop together this and be able to provide more toys?
More toys. So I've done it. I'm collaborating with some other departments, right? So we're having a brand new occupational therapy program. So I'm working with them as well. And so we're going to replicate the same concept. And we have worked with other schools who will then do it. And what's really nice is I had a student who leveraged social media. So she was very active on her town's Buy Nothing group, if you're familiar with a Buy Nothing.
What is it?
It's a group on social media that is for a community. So likely it's a town, and individuals post on there when they have something that they want to give away. So it's to really reduce landfills, to support donating.
Sort of like Free Cycle, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah,
yep.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And so what she did is she posted on her Buy Nothing group, I'm collecting toys for this project, and we got 20 toys from that post. So what we do now every semester is I develop, a prompt, and then all of my students put that in whatever Facebook group that they might be in to get toy donations.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about different contexts. And one of the things that I've run into some, not a lot of difficulty, but in classes where I teach with games that have heavy amounts of reading and that kind of thing. There's certain games that have cards and certain manipulables that can be difficult to manage. And I'm just thinking about how this might adapt towards more of an adult audience or something like that. If we're talking about, I don't know, like a game like Exploding Kittens or something like that, right? So where you've got cards and you have to read the cards quickly, and to kind of determine. And I'm just trying to imagine how that might work, in that kind of. So if you were doing some sort of a project like that, how would you tackle something like that? What would you?
That's where I think the creativity and the problem solving really comes into play in this field, because it's so fun to think about different ways that you can increase access. So when we're talking about a card game, right? A barrier might be holding the cards, right? And so that's one strategy that we use a lot is a pool noodle. So if you take a pool noodle and you slice it in half and then you cut a little slit, it will hold cards perfectly. And it frees up your hands to then do something else. And if you are having difficulty maybe with the text and reading it quickly, there are apps on your phone. For example, there's one app called Seeing AI, and it will, when you put your phone right up against text, it will automatically read it out loud to you.
Oh, nice.
And you don't even need to take a picture. Like it just recognizes text and will then read it, which is amazing.
I tried the Meta glasses in October, and I was fascinated by it. And I thought they were relatively accessible. The price tag wasn't too high. But you really just put them on, and it reads everything in front of you, and then you can just tell it, can you read it in another language? Or can you translate, this is in Spanish, can you translate it for me in English, and so on. You can ask it, if you're looking at plants, what plant is this? Can you give me more information about it? And I had never tried something like that before, and I thought it was amazing. So all these apps coming out where you can just point at something and they can just say it out loud. I just think technology is fascinating nowadays.
Right.
And things are coming out with great opportunities.
Yes. Absolutely.
What else have you brought?
Let's see. So my next piece is I did bring some coloring because I think especially for me when I'm, working or in a meeting, I love to keep my hands busy. Like I'm a very, very big kind of fidgeter. So my first fidget is I brought some coloring books, but one of the things that I have really been focusing on and working, I have some students in my class who are working with individuals with visual impairments. And so I have raised line coloring paper.
Oh, neat.
So I have one that's already printed, and it's a very popular cartoon character who's a dog, and anywhere her fur is a different color, the pattern on the raised line is different. And so it allows to distinguish color for someone who is engaging using Braille or using tactile.
Right. Wow. This, I wish, I don't know if you could see this on the camera, but, Jay, is that all right? But it's raised and it's got, sort of a texture to everything. You might be able to see the texture through the camera, but, it's definitely got this sort of it's almost like you're petting the dog or something.
I want to feel it.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where, again, thinking about a lot of the work that I like to do is go into an environment in a community setting or, like Melanie said, the performing arts, and think about, okay, what might be a barrier for someone going into this space, and how can we then be creative and remove that barrier and provide options?
So let me ask you, are there other guides right now that already tell you the pattern for light blue, or what the pattern is for yellow, and so on?
So I think that one is just...
It's just a one-off, unique one.
These don't have, so if you do look at the top, or you can feel at the top, they have Braille at the top that gives a descriptor of what the picture is. But otherwise, the tactile is really just kind of pattern-wise. Okay. So from my understanding, there's no kind of like light blue is those little swirls, but they do have text representations on them in Braille as well.
Oh, this is amazing.
Very fun. And let's see, so my next thing, shall I bring?
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, poppets are so rewarding in so many different ways. So I have a rainbow colored poppet. However, this one has sight words. And so in special ed, sight words are traditionally very challenging because you can't sound them out. So in the English language, right, when you're trying to sound out THE, it does not sound like THE. So those are called sight words. They're words that students just have to memorize. They cannot sound them out. And oftentimes, again, it's something where you need repetition and it gets boring. So this is a nice little poppet to help with sight word recognition.
I have seen these. I had no idea that they were called puppets or what they were for.
Well, it is a it's a fidget thing,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Right. So it's just like you just cut. I imagine that could get like a little crazy if you have like a whole class full of kids like
Just popping.
popping, and it just sounds like firecrackers
Yes.
all the time. Let's all do it. Let's try
Let's
the
all
treatment.
pop together.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Can get very overstimulating.
Yeah. That's pretty neat, though. I love the. Can I borrow that?
Oh, absolutely.
So, okay. I see. All right. They're. I was looking down,
Oh, yeah.
so it made no sense.
Across.
Across. But the words are across. Yes. Okay. Yeah. See, now I need help with my sight words. I
had no idea that there was a term for that.
So many terms for everything.
Wow, this is neat. This is neat. Definitely. Oh, are there different words on both sides?
I think
Looks like.
so.
I think.
I think.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
There are different words on both sides.
And there's math ones, right? Like multiplication charts, like
Oh,
so
yeah.
many options, and then you can
See, now I
customize
would have
them.
loved that if because that multiplication charts, that was like I hated that so much. I just I know this already.
And how was it when you had to teach math to your kids? Was it completely different than the way you learned it?
Yes, because they're teaching math completely different from
Yes.
the way that I learned it. Right. So I was no help whatsoever. And my son's practically a mathematician now, so he made out fine without me.
It worked.
Yeah. I mean, I just can't. I can't. Just from I guess one of the things that I think thinking back on my own learning in childhood, there are certain things that I was really excited about and really interested in, and then there were other things that just didn't capture my attention at all. This would be something that I would get captured by, but I would want to. I imagine that it would make some sort of an affinity with the students who would, actually need these tools, right? So it would probably make this better social connection with, among kids at least, because for me, I mean, I would want to play with that kid because he's got the cool thing, right?
Right.
That
Yeah,
sort of.
but I'm also thinking, we go through these workshops on UDL and different ways to make our classes more adaptive and more inclusive, but we never really go into a tactile manner. We never really look at props
Yeah.
or things that we can use. We just focus more on I guess the academics or the reading or presentations.
Right.
And just even looking at this, I'm already thinking, I'm like, okay, how can I pay closer attention to my students and maybe notice a few different things? Maybe one of them actually needs a fidget to concentrate in my classes and I don't know about it or I don't realize it. And I can have small details
Right.
in my labs, right? Maybe just 2 or 3 things or a puppet.
Pop it. Yep.
Puppet.
Pop it.
Or even little things where I can just tell them, okay, this is here. If you need to use it or if you need assistance, let me know and we can talk a little bit more about this. I wish I knew more about it or we have workshops on that as well for faculty that really are interested in making their classes inclusive and adaptive.
And that's the whole concept, right, of the default is diversity, right? And I think that's often in the special ed realm, what we're always trying to reinforce, right, is that there is no normal, right? There is no everyone is doing this. The default, especially in 2025, is everyone is different, right? So how do we then embrace that in the classroom and what does that look like? And Melanie, that's exactly what you're reinforcing, right? Is that, hey, I've got all different chairs, right? I've got all different, desks, and we do a lot of putty in the special ed department. And for me, because when my students are on campus, we're doing something hands-on, I always have little things, and everyone's always playing with something, right, or doodling. And it just lends itself to everyone kind of doing what they need in that moment, which might look a little different, but that's okay, right? And kind of breeding that community, which is so important.
Yeah, I think, of course, I got to bring things back to games, right? Because I always do.
Thing, Dave.
It's my thing. But in the classroom, like one of the things that I try to do quite frequently is have some sort of manipulable. I'm having trouble with that word today, but something tactile that the students can, sort of manage as part of process, right? So, for example, if we're having like a group conversation, and I want to make sure that everybody is contributing equally, like I would give everybody in the team two poker chips, and then when they would make a contribution, they would put it in the kitty in the middle. Right.
Yep.
And that would indicate that they were, so one of the things that does is it gives, it gives that fidget, it gives that tactile part, but it also slows the process down.
Yeah.
Right. Which, we have to be a little bit more active and purposeful with the way that we're engaging with one another. And then we kind of talk through it in a little bit more purposeful and careful way because, now it's my turn. And you have a visible marker that says that this is, it's my turn now. It's kind of like the pass the stick speaking kind of thing, right? But in this case, everybody has, and you're basically giving away your stick,
right,
so to speak. But I think that's like a really interesting thing that I hadn't made the connection to, accessibility, because what it's actively doing is, enabling someone else, but then it's also making the people who are who don't need those assistive technologies or tools to be a little bit more mindful of the process and the other people around them and how they're engaging, right? So if everybody is using that same tool or that same fidget, then it's an equalizer, right? It pulls that person up and it enables them or helps them to build focus or whatever. But then everybody else is like, sort of getting an even ground with them in terms of process and understanding their perspective and that sort of thing, which I think is a really neat connection that I hadn't made before. So,
and even in your example, so that's what. When kind of prepping and thinking about my creative process is I'm always kind of looking at, where can a barrier be removed and where can we think differently? And even in your example of the difference of, the talking stick versus the poker chips, in the talking stick, I know for me, whenever I'm in that scenario, my anxiety is like all the way up to my nose because I'm thinking of how many people are left. When is it my turn? What am I going to say? Right. And it's that you've got that intrinsic nervousness happening.
Right.
Whereas in your example, it relieves that pressure of we have to go in order, right? I can take my time. I can either speak first. I can sit back. I can engage and listen. And it really does open up to provide a more equitable experience within that setting because you not only have fidgets, but then you have a visual indicator of who's presented and who's shared thoughts. And also for some of our participants who might like to dominate, it does teach them to like sit back and like, okay, what did everybody else share? And so it is such an amazing strategy of adding kind of some tactiles to experiences.
Yeah. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, you also brought markers.
Yes.
So what are we going to do with this markers?
Oh, yes. Well, so I thought kind of as we were chatting and kind of just talking, we could color if you would like. So I did bring some adult coloring books. Now, I will be honest that I find many adult coloring books to be overwhelming. I'm like I need to complete something. And when I see an 8.5 by 11 page with 4,000 tiny little things to color in, it completely does the opposite of what I want it to do.
Yeah.
So I have a ironic adult coloring book that is funny, but also for me very accessible because I can complete it. So everyone can kind of rip out a page, and I also brought markers that are dual-sided in my attempt to be as inclusive as possible. So one side is a little bit thicker, and then the other side is more of like a pen tip. So you can choose your experience if you would like.
Sorry, I'm laughing because I'm going through the pages and I'm reading the things. Yes,
They are
great.
adult.
They are adults, and it is very funny.
But that's really where, again, like I find that oftentimes in the world of accessibility, we focus so much on learning and work that we don't always think about fun.
Go, Dave.
Okay.
I don't know if we can show this, if we want to show this on the screen, but this is what I picked, Dave.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep. I was like, I'm going to go with an adult coloring book and lean in. So I leaned in and took a chance.
I zoomed in on it anyway.
I will show it
this
to
is
you, Jay, after we're done. I'm
This
going to
This
pick
is
a
really
few
good.
colors already.
no, I think I have to go with this one. I mean, I guess we could probably put like a adult language warning on our episode, but
Of course.
Okay, I already
this one
picked.
is the one that I picked. So
Yes.
that's,
Classic.
so
I picked
that's
4
what-
colors, Dave, passing around the markers to you.
Here, Dave, go next. Whoa. I lost him. There you go, Dave.
All right. Well, I think I need an orange here. So you have another prop here too. What else do you have?
Sure.
Maybe you can kind of, while we're preoccupied with our coloring.
Absolutely. So what I brought this is a low-tech communication support. So it is a kind of laminated card on a lanyard, and it's got something called core language. So there's research done on the most frequently used words when in spoken language in order to communicate. And so those are classified as core words. And the reason I brought this is because one of my kind of areas of work, and I will say creativity for me that really fills my bucket, is I do work with performing arts and focusing on creating a communicative, inclusive environment. So showing kind of even within an art setting that, using spoken language, using a device, using pictures, no matter what, kind of those methods of sharing your message and engaging in something is accepted in a community space. So that one's just kind of a pre-created one, but we've created a lot of them that are custom to the show or the performing arts venue.
So, can you give me an example of how this will be used?
Sure. So on this card, for example, there are very general words. And the concept is we want to kind of build your comfort with using this across many different settings. So there is a word on here. I have, let's see, open. So I can use the word open to open a snack at the theater. I can use it to say, I want to open the door, and you can model it. And so that's what I do when I am working an event. I will use the communication board and pair what I'm saying with activating or selecting a button. So I'll say, okay, we're going to open the door, and then you're going to go in here.
Okay.
And so as I'm saying the words, I'm pointing to those words as well. And what that's doing is just showing the individual who might be using a different communication method that your method is just as important and valued as speaking. And we also do it to show parents and caregivers as well how they can model and use communication supports in all different environments.
This may sound silly. I don't know.
No,
I'm
silly.
just going to throw it out here. I don't have kids. I have 4 kids. Over the past, I think around the pandemic is when I realized there's buttons
Yes.
for dogs and cats and other animals. And you can sort of like buy a kit that includes, 5 to 7 buttons, and you can select. They don't come with predetermined words. You select the words and you record them, and then you just teach your pets to press the button when they're trying to say that word, when they're trying to communicate. So I sort of like immediately associated that with the buttons. And over the past 4 or 5 years, I keep saying like, I need to get buttons for my dogs.
Yes.
But I have 6 animals. So it's like, how do I teach all 6 of them the same thing, right? Like I need to, at some point, I need to downsize. And then like start with 1 and then maybe some repetitive action.
Right. Or you pick the most beneficial communication, right? Like, I'm hungry.
Yes.
So therefore, you could then model it for everyone. But those buttons, I buy those for the department and for my practice because they're accessible. They're at a low price point. But those recording messages we'll use when we're playing a game, right? If you're reading a book that has a repeated phrase, you can then use those buttons to say that phrase and then pass them around and kind of empower students to participate within an activity by singing a song or doing something. So those buttons, that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, I would have imagined that whoever thought about doing that for animals, this came from
Right.
assistive technology research.
Exactly. Right. They were like, wait, we can give a voice to the dog.
Yeah, well, my at this point, my dog doesn't have any problem communicating with me, right? It's trained me well. It's very clear what she wants and when she wants it.
It's very clear with the bosses.
Yes.
In that
oh
relationship.
no, there's no question. There's no question. I know when she wants to go out. I know when she wants food. I know when she wants to play. And there are no compromises.
Right. With a familiar communicator, though. If you have a dog sitter.
That's right.
Then.
Wow, this is probably the quietest we've gotten.
We've been,
yeah. I'm so like, it's taking the words right out of my mouth.
And it is very relaxing.
Oh yes, well, I mean, isn't that sort of the point?
But now I'm starting to think, right? So like Dave is into games. I'm also like into puzzles, and I've discovered late in life that for me, relaxing means not necessarily turning my brain off, because that is very unrelaxing and anxiety driven to me, but just like doing activities where building puzzles, or I've been doing Legos, or doing some sort of like arts and craft where I'm still doing something tactile and creative, but not necessarily writing. Or or doing academic reading and things like that. And I never really gave drawing a thought because, like you mentioned, you find them overwhelming. I find them overwhelming, and I was a little bit ashamed to say that because I am a designer. Right. So coloring should be super fun for me. But some books, I have to confess, I have 2 coloring books at home that I have never color on, just because I have given that a try. But even just doing this as a group activity right now, where we're having a conversation, but we're also coloring, and it's feeling very relaxing. Like immediately thinking, I'm like, could I have coloring books in the classroom?
Right.
When we have studio days, maybe the students don't need to be on their computer for 3 hours. Maybe they can take 5 minutes breaks every 30 minutes or 20 minutes and do a little bit of coloring, or step away and feel something else creative that is not necessarily the logo that they're making or the website that they're creating.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that kind of gets confusing when folks start to talk about play in the classroom, because we talk to students about the importance of letting our ideas ruminate, right? If we're talking about like writing an essay or something like that, like, we'll say, okay, well, write for a while and then walk away from it and then come back and try to edit it. Don't like try to do it all at the same time. And this is part of the reason why, we, constantly are trying to get our students to not do things at the very last minute, because it doesn't give yourself any time to sort of process in the background what you're doing, what your activity is. And I think that that's something that I think we take for granted in the classroom as well, is that we have this kind of notion that it has to be like this super active information dump or active processing that is directly related to everything that's going on. But if there is too much of that, you've got information overload.
Right.
You have confusion in terms of what priorities are and those sorts of things, and it's very difficult for the students to kind of formulate. So we get surprised when we say, "Oh, does anybody have any questions?" and the students say no.
Right.
Because we're not giving them any time to process what we just said.
True.
Right.
So something like this activity actually gives the potential for us to say, okay, well, let's take a moment to just kind of breathe a little bit and kind of figure out what we're doing, or setting the stage for us to just give ourselves permission to rest a second,
Right.
and think things through. Sarah Baker Bailey in my department, you know Sarah, right? She has students do in some of her classes do yoga exercises at the beginning of her class to kind of break frame with their day, and then get in the mode of what they're going to do in the classroom. And I think that's a very active like interruption of their what their expectations are and that sort of thing. And I think that's it's a cool thing, but something like this becomes something that you can insert like in the class and make it so that it's a little bit more in the moment, rather than, sort of this active, like,
Separate.
okay, this is the cue that our class is going to start, that kind of a thing.
Yes, I think about that all the time because I feel like you just called me out, Dave. I constantly ask them, do you guys have questions? Other questions. So, like, I'll lecture, and after, like, 5 or 10 minutes, or I'll, like, 4 or 5 slides, any questions right now? And the room is just quiet. But it's exactly what you just said. They're not having time to process. So I'm just sort of like putting them in the spot
Right.
without any warnings.
Right,
Even
right.
though at this point, I think they're already used to me asking them, do you have any questions? No questions. I keep joking that I'm going to bring them candy and just start throwing candy if they ask the questions or they interact with me. But just making those little elements or moments to stop. I like the whole yoga aspect of it. I have a professor in my doctoral classes who does this, but it's more dancing related. Or some stretching. So it varies between some stretching and some dancing. And in every class, somebody else has to lead it. So it's not just the professor leading this,
Yep.
but we're taking an active role in it. So if it's stretching, okay, who's going to create those stretches? If we're going to be dancing, who's going to pick the music? Are we going to
Right.
sing along? And just something as silly as the other day we did head, knees, and toes.
Yep.
I thought I knew the lyrics of that? I did not.
Did not.
So I kept like going like, oh, I'm saying it wrong. And like, oh, everybody's moving so fast. I'm like, how did I not know this before? And then I just sort of like remind myself of like, okay, you didn't grow up with this.
Right.
So you learned this as an adult. Maybe it's okay if you're not doing it all right, because the whole point is for
Yeah.
you to just relax and forget about the context of the reading or the information overload and just breathe for a moment.
Well, and I had some colleagues that when I was in grad school that they were teaching assistants for a large lecture. It was like 400 students, and the way that they used, sort of that interruptive moment was they would play music when they came into the classroom, and they would have the students basically help them DJ, but they would bring in or they would play either something popular or something that was like related to the news, like they might play like Taylor Swift or whatever, and then they might have some surprises thrown in, but. What they would do then is when the music was off, it was time to start class. And that became the, sort of cue. It's time to get down to business. So it's kind of an opposite sort of thing where you have this sort of build of activity. Everybody's excited about this thing or talking about whatever the song is, or, oh, isn't this like weird that they're playing this song or whatever. And then all of a sudden, it's silent. Let's get down to business, right? And I thought that was always an interesting technique. I never had a classroom here at Southern that had the opportunity to do that because our classes aren't that big, right? So I never really got a chance to test that out myself to see how I would do it and what music I would play or whatever.
Right.
But I have used music in other forms, like in the classroom, like if we're doing a group activity, to have music playing in the background just as cover noise, right? To help the students kind of get in the moment and show them that it's, it doesn't have to be a silent classroom and we're all hush hush and talking and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's probably something that I need to bring back because I haven't done that in a while. But I do have tons of group activities in my classes, and getting the students to engage is often, or giving them the cue to engage, is sort of. Tricky at times, but then using that music cue can really be helpful to say, okay, here's the start of the activity, here's the end of the activity, that sort of thing.
I have a question, if I can interject.
Sure.
And we can kind of pass this question around. Do you have any creative ways on how we can, because what we're talking about now is essentially creating this creative bubble for students, right? To be comfortable enough. But do you have any tips on how we can creatively bring them back to the moment? So imagine you have an exercise and everybody's kind of off on their own. How are we now taking them out of that to come back into class? I don't know if that question makes sense because I always have trouble with bringing students back on if I say, okay, in this particular segment of class, I need for you to get into your groups and we need to start creating some shooting scripts, so to say, in my film classes. And I am observing the room and I'm reading everybody, they're nonverbal and everybody is, laser focused on that task. I find it almost as if I'm disrupting
to bring them back.
the creative process to bring them back in. And I feel bad almost saying, hey, we still have some other, quote unquote business, for lack of a better description, that we do need to get to before we all kind of break and go our own way. So I was just wondering, from your perspectives, is there a creative way, or maybe not, to kind of bring them out and back onto the path that we've created for that class?
Sure. I'll take it first.
Go for it.
Yeah, please do.
So what's really interesting is that as all of you are sharing, your format is primarily in person, right? Whereas in my program, in the graduate program, I'm primarily online. So it's also a very, like, as you guys were talking, it was like I have to think so purposefully about how do I give them an opportunity to process in an online environment, which maybe we'll talk about that after. But I'm a huge proponent of visual timers. Like, I use them personally with my children, professionally, and even just for me to keep myself kind of going and motivated on long, writing days or, so there's something called Classroom Screen. And it's a website where it has, essentially, it's an interactive kind of like whiteboard template. So you can have an image in the background, but it has all these tiny little widgets that you can add. And so what I really like is when I am doing group work, you can pull up a visual timer. And so it will then show you using, a little hourglass, how much time there is left. And also, like, you can write up your expectations of what they're supposed to be doing. It's like, I'm a big proponent with the special ed background of, here are the expectations, here's what you're doing, and then here's the time, right? This is what it's going to look like when we're done. This is your cue, and then we transition, right? Always kind of giving that front load of information so that they can kind of tailor their creative process to, like, okay, there is an arc, right? I'm a big, all right, 2-minute warning, sort of okay, finish your thought so that we can pull back. But always having a cue and helping them self-monitor, right, is just a really important skill in general, right? As you're in the field, right, and you're in a brainstorming session.
I was thinking about getting a physical hourglass and putting it on the table.
I have that, and I haven't used it yet. But I have an hourglass that I have in my office. I have lots of like archaic props and stuff because that's just my motif that I'm trying to go in my office. But that idea of having timers. I mean, I think that I have used that in the past, and it does change the tenor of things. Certainly, it does make the students very conscious of the time frame that they're working within, and sometimes it can heighten the sense of urgency of what they're talking about. So if you're talking about something that's a little bit more free form, it might not necessarily lend to that, right? So if you're talking about like trying to make them feel relaxed and all that kind of thing, the timers can kind of interrupt that a little bit. I think the other another way of kind of dealing with it from a sort of a group or team perspective is just to have sort of the report out kind of responsibility, right? And asking the students to kind of summarize what they did, or and have one person speaking on behalf of the team to kind of and this is not like a huge revelation or anything, right? Like, I'm not saying anything that folks probably don't do already, but I think that making the students aware that that's going to be something that they're going to be accountable for, then gives them a sense of conclusion to that particular activity. So you're giving them some time, but then they have to report back. So then they're going to be leading up to that end goal. So making that, our end goal is for you to do a report out. That sort of a thing. That might be a way of reining in that kind of chaos that comes from a free form kind of, because I have that a lot with brainstorming sessions, right? And trying to teach students, healthy brainstorming technique. It's a challenge, right? Because they do things like, just want to riff on and create the whole project right there.
Yes.
Right. And it's like, no, that's not what we're doing at this point. What we're not trying to troubleshoot every idea and all that kind of stuff. What we're trying to do is just like come up with a whole list of ideas and things that we could work with. And let's save the processing for later. We're just coming up with ideas. And trying to get them focused on that becomes really, and I'm sure that Jay, you're probably used to that with things like writing scripts and that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Where they want to write the whole script the very first, it's just, here's our idea. And here's what the dialogue is going to be,
Correct. Yeah, I have a whole step process that I try to. It's almost. I don't know if this sounds. I hope this doesn't sound bad, but I have crafted a process, a step process to their creative journey, so to say, in the script writing process. So I have them take steps building to the script.
No, but I think we all do that in some sort of way where there's sort of like there's a process to an assignment and you got to focus on one area first because you can move before you can move on to the next section. I do that a lot in the interactive class right now in the UX UI because we're creating an app. And I explained from the very beginning, we are moving together. We are not, everybody's not going to be in their own space. Yes, everyone is creating their own app. But we are moving along in the semester together. So we're all going to work on our logos together. We're all going to work on our buttons. We're all going to work on our different pages and so on. So there is this still sort of like step format that they have to follow. Yeah. But I do get what you're saying, Jay, because I struggle with the bringing them back together again. I never thought about using timers, but I love the timer on Zoom.
Yes.
So I never connected one with the other. And maybe just, okay, let's set up a timer in the big screen and everyone can look at it. I sometimes just be like, okay, 5 minutes, and just give them a verbal cue. I have used music, but very little. The thing that has worked for me the most is what you mentioned, Dave, just having them accountable, just do a little summary of what was discussed. Sometimes one person will share. Sometimes they won't even have to share at all. All they have to hand me is the summary. To make sure that they work together and they went through their emotions and the different stages. But I do agree that it's sometimes complicated to have the students not want to work in the entire project immediately. Just last week, I had a conversation with a student who created a logo, but the logo was not due for another week and a half for us to just discuss. Not even like finalize, but just to discuss and process and, do sort of like an informal critique. And I'm like, this logo looks great. It's amazing. But don't feel like you're done. Don't feel like this is final. Just keep going with the flow. If you get another idea, put it down on paper, start working on it on the computer. A week later, there were 3 other ideas and his favorite logo was not that first one that he had created. And it's just like getting them like, there's no need to be so excited at first and try to flush everything out. Let's just breathe it out. Let's take our time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have the same thing in a world class, right? Because what we're basically doing in that class is creating a fictional world, and we do everything from talking about what the land that the people live on is like, what the terrain is and all that sort of thing. But then we also talk about, things like the social structure and how is how do they govern each other, the community and, those sorts of things. And that puts the students at a position where they're ready to jump ahead to tell the stories about the people that live in those places. And I'm like, well, no, wait, hold on. We got to figure out like what are we talking about first? And they want to just do the whole,
do it all.
Basically, write the novel, the first day of class. And it's like, no, okay, let's hold off. And we have to, kind of think, because we're trying to think through what the process of doing this is. Now, if you're going to do it on your own, you can do it in whatever way that you want, but this is a class and we're trying to be collaborative here, right? So if we're trying to collaborate, we got to kind of go at the pace that everybody's comfortable with, right? And some folks are like, at that beginning stage and other folks are way ahead. So I get that completely. And you know, Jay, I don't think that sounds bad at all, because I think that we're all doing that to a certain degree, right? Like you have to do modeling
Yes.
of process in some way, right?
Yeah,
And
it's
yeah,
for those, I kind of always just put it out front, and I try to, for better, worse, or indifferent, ask, or at least I project a question that I just say, well, there are some of you in here that probably are more along than others, so I kind of just put that out there. However, take this opportunity to take a step back and kind of reinforce the foundation of what we're trying to do. Right. So that brings us back to like, okay, so maybe there's a little less stress on myself because, I've already gone through a script writing class or a design class, and we're kind of just, circling back and talking about some concepts, tools, software that I've already used. But the instructor is correct. I could take this opportunity where it feels a little less stressful, and I can kind of reinforce, the foundations, the basics. But I can also, and I encourage this, you can also help and share that information and that knowledge with others that are in the group.
Right.
right.
So, I mean, I don't know if everybody agrees, but students learn from each other just as much, if not more,
Yes.
than from us. We propose
Well,
information, and that information, and everybody talked about this earlier, that it does take time to, it takes time for the information to get to their brains and then to process it and then make sense of it for themselves. And, everybody is going to understand information differently. And it really does make the learning process enriching and fruitful when they can start to reiterate what we're teaching them or what we're talking about and hearing it from their perspective.
well, that whole point of where the students are getting their knowledge from. When we're starting to talk about that whole sense of they're learning more from each other, I think that comes down to sort of biases and sort of expectations that education is done in a particular way. Right. That, it has to be an authority figure that's endowing you with this insightful knowledge or something like that. And I think that in those cases where we're putting the students in a position to be self-reflective, to process their own information, and to try to engage things on an individual level, what they're basically starting to do is become self-sufficient in their learning, right? They are sort of internalizing that process. So if they are learning from other people, that's going to make them a better lifelong learner than somebody that is getting it just from the professor. Because then, they're basically, it's also an abdication of their own responsibility in the learning process, right? They're basically saying, well, it's up to you to teach me. Teach me something. Go ahead. Make it happen. And that's not how learning works, right? As we're doing active things, that is part of the process, and that's part of the engagement that makes it all possible. And I think that's what I think that's an incredibly important part of learning how to be creative, is developing a sense of important. I don't want to say self-importance, because that's the wrong phrasing, because it makes it seem like you're getting ego, right? But just that whole idea that you're self-sufficient in your own abilities, right? That, what you are doing and what you're trying can be enough. It doesn't have to be enough. But it can be. And then as soon as you start to pull in conversation with other people, then it might enhance that and make it better, right? So I think building that sort of awareness of how we learn, and how we can learn in conjunction with others, or what we can learn from others, is really important. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit. I think, was it on mic at the beginning of the show or beforehand? Just the idea of learning from the conversations that we have, right? Like, it seems like every time that we have an episode, we're picking up on something that is helping us to think about things better or differently. And like, clearly we all think about this a lot. But the fact that we come in here and we have a new guest, and the guest brings in something that is just sort of transforming the way that we're thinking about things, like, I think that's a really powerful thing. And if we can give that to our students, that's pretty awesome. That's a pretty big gift.
Yeah.
I have to say that, like, in terms of my own creativity and then sparking the creativity of my students, like I mentioned, the majority of my classes are online and with graduate students. So I'm working with teachers who have been working all day, are exhausted. And my ability to leverage the use of artificial intelligence and using AI within my classes, I found that's where I'm getting a lot more of that creative spark from students. And I'm finding even in myself, I'm like, how can I leverage this, right? Like, how can I use this tool for them to think more creatively and target that learning? When we were talking previously about the brainstorming and like, where do we want them to focus their learning? And that's where I'm telling them, okay, use AI for that, right? Because I want your cognitive load and your creativity to focus on this individual and this situation and how we can empower them and remove barriers, not how you're going to write it in a paragraph. Like, that's not what's important. And that's where I'm finding so much of that is kind of unfolding, where I'm like, okay, here's this tool. Now ask ChatGPT to give you feedback, right? Have it ask you questions, and pushing them to then be more creative in how they can elaborate on their ideas and their practice using these tools. And like, that's so fun.
Yeah. And that I think is a great way to, sort of teach healthy use of those tools.
We can have a totally different episode just talking about AI and how to use utilizing it for inclusive teaching, and sort of like discussing like the ethical way of including AI into our workflow and students' workflows.
I hate to say this, but we're running a little long from our normal episode, which is great, because actually what we did was we actually embodied what we were talking about, which is to let things like breathe a little bit and let us process and those sorts of things. So we have our coloring that we did, and I tried to stay in the lines as much as possible, but that's all right. So
I did do my best to stay in the lines. I didn't finish. I need more colors, but I didn't want to keep like reaching over.
Yeah, we kind of took the.
So I'm gonna have to take this to my office and finish it there.
But Lauren, thank you so much for giving us so many things to talk about and think about, and just giving us a moment to relax a little bit. That was like a really nice.
Yes, this was a wonderful hour. I want to repeat it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just to remind everybody, we are actively soliciting input on our show. So if there's something that you would like for us to talk about, or issues or ideas, topics that you want us to sort of engage with in some way in an episode, please feel free to write us at creativejpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you. Journeys is a podcast produced at Southern Connecticut State University by faculty, students, and staff who are interested in exploring our creative potential.